The Last Word is coming up next with Catherine Rampell in for Lawrence. Hey, Catherine.
Hey, Jen. Quite the news tonight about Jack Smith, eh?
Huge news. I'm so grateful to Ken Delanian and our producers who were able to come through that and try to make sense or call out, shall I say, the tremendous level of BS involved in that referral.
Yeah, it does make you wonder a little bit who will be willing to serve as civil servants in these very important but divisive jobs that will put a target on your back if you take them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly the goal, and something I think Jack Smith called out when he did an interview with Nicole Wallace just a few weeks ago. It's part of it is to silence people, and part of it is to have a PR witch hunt. And it's just whether it silences people. It hasn't silenced a lot of people so far, including Jack Smith. So we will see.
Yeah, we shall see. Thanks so much, Jen.
Thanks, Catherine.
Donald Trump started day 145 of his unpopular and illegal war with Iran by again threatening to commit what certainly sounds like war crimes. In a post this morning on social media, Trump wrote, "From this point forward, anytime the Islamic Republic of Iran shoots at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, whether it be by missile, rocket, drone, or any other device or weapon, the United States will bomb and destroy one bridge or power plant, including those located next to or in the capital city of Tehran." Politico points out, bombing civilian infrastructure like power plants is generally recognized internationally as a war crime. But it is not the first time the president has threatened to carry out strikes on such critical sites. Trump has previously used such rhetoric to push Iran to reopen the strait. The Geneva Conventions prohibit strikes on infrastructure acknowledged to be indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. Predictably, also, this post seems to have done very little to deter hostilities after CNBC reported that Iran's Houthi allies in Yemen have completed preparations to attack ships transiting the Red Sea's southern access point, citing a maritime security group led by the U.S. Navy. Tonight, Yemen's armed forces are claiming that it has successfully targeted 2 Saudi oil tankers with missiles and drones, saying that they, quote, violated the blockade imposed by the Yemeni armed forces in the Red Sea. Al Jazeera reports, quote, Saudi Arabia has not commented on the claims, but the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Center said it had received reports that a tanker has been struck. And according to the New York Times, Iran's leaders dug in against President Trump's threats on Wednesday to strike bridges and power plants in Iran if it targeted any more ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The foreign minister warning on social media that Iran would fight an eye for an eye. The specificity of Mr. Trump's threat reflected how much the focus of the war has narrowed into a fight over the strait, a critical passage for global oil and gas, even as he maintains that his wider objective is preventing Iran from building a nuclear weapon. The strait was open and free to transit before the war began, but Iran has proved it can effectively control traffic with threats of strikes, and in doing so, gained powerful leverage over global markets. After firing off his social media post, Donald Trump left the White House for Dover Air Force Base, where he took part in the dignified transfer of the 4 U.S. soldiers who were killed over the weekend. The bodies of 25-year-old U.S. Army Lieutenant Tyler James Feehan of Hawaii, 19-year-old U.S. Army Private Isabella Gonzalez of Texas, 28-year-old U.S. Army Sergeant Angel Rampersand of New York, and 30-year-old U.S. Army Sergeant Michael Emmanuel Swinton of North Carolina were returned home for the final time. On the way to Dover, Donald Trump appeared to make up an imaginary story about what those 4 soldiers, all of whom made the ultimate sacrifice, allegedly said about his war in Iran. Listen.
We're going to Dover. Yes, some of you are going with us to honor our heroes, and they are indeed great heroes, actually. They said, and all of them said very strongly, we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. They won't have a nuclear weapon.
It would be quite a coincidence that 4 different people who were stationed in different countries to have all made the exact same statement, and to have it made, quote unquote, strongly. Of course, it had to be strongly because that's Trump's favorite adverb. So that's how Donald Trump honors 4 dead service members before their families have even held funerals. American voters certainly do not believe in Trump's war, for what it's worth. A new Washington Post poll shows that 69% of Americans disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling the war in Iran, while 68% of Americans think the war in Iran was not worth fighting in the first place. And a political poll finds just a little more than a third of MAGA voters think that this war is worth it. So not even Donald Trump's own voters believe Donald Trump's stated war objective. And in the fact of all facts to the contrary, Donald Trump had the audacity to say this.
Americans aren't against the war. A poll just came out. Americans don't want high gasoline prices, but they're not against the war.
Following today's dignified transfer, Donald Trump went to Georgia to campaign for Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff's Republican opponent. Donald Trump used that opportunity to brag about bringing the family of one of these fallen soldiers with him to the rally.
One of the families happened to be traveling to Georgia, beautiful family. We're going to Georgia. I said, so if you want, I'll give you a ride on Air Force One. And they said, wow.
He then proceeded to downplay the gravity of the war those American soldiers had just died fighting in, yet again calling his war a mere skirmish.
This skirmish we have going on, I call it a skirmish. This is with this skirmish we have with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I call it that because, let me tell you, they're getting hit so hard, and they want to make a deal. But I say they're not ready to make a deal.
And then tonight, U.S. Central Command confirmed that Donald Trump directed U.S. forces to launch more strikes against Iranian military targets, stating, quote, "The mission will continue to further degrade Iran's ability to threaten civilian mariners and commercial vessels transiting regional waters." And so, a deeply unpopular war with no direction, no clear endgame, is still putting American armed forces in harm's way tonight. And why? Well, neither Donald Trump nor his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, seem able to answer what should be a very simple question and a very important question. It is that failure of leadership that our next guest, Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, made exceedingly clear yesterday in response to Senate testimony by Secretary Hegseth.
The Strait of Hormuz is still closed, reminding everybody it was open before the war. Prices were lower for everybody until the war. And of course, tragically, people, service members, our warfighters, who we care deeply about, are still dying.
I think your characterization of this incredible effort as a failure is reckless. Shame on you and others who call this a quagmire and a failure, and then you want to turn around and say you support the warfighter. Either you do or you don't.
Secretary Hegseth, if you listen to my comments, you would have heard me say how amazing our warfighters are.
I heard failure. And the word heard, I heard exactly what you said.
I will tell you how I use the word failure, because I use the word failure to their leaders. You, sir, are the failure, not the men and women who are on that front line, not the men and women who hold up their honor with distinction. But if there's a lack of a winning strategy, they're in harm's way. Their leaders have failed them.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. He is the ranking member of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee and a member of the Armed Services and Appropriations Committees. Senator, has the Senate been briefed on this new wave of strikes U.S. forces conducted earlier tonight?
We haven't received a briefing on, at least I haven't. Other members of the Armed Services Committee, I don't believe, has had it. The problem, as you listed here, is that we have basically a president that has no strategic idea as to how to actually win this war, to end this war. This is going to be one of those forever type of wars that we're in, where there isn't a conclusion, and our warfighters are being put into harm's way because of the lack of a coherent strategic mission that is going to be accomplished. And this is simply unacceptable. I was very frank with Secretary Hegseth that this is basically a failure of leadership. Let's be absolutely clear. It's not a failure of the men and women who serve us with honor and distinction. They put their lives on the line. And unfortunately, we have more folks coming home to their families who are grieving the loss of loved ones, because this failure of leadership is putting them in harm's way with no end in sight. not only is it costing the human lives, which you can never put a price on, it's also costing American taxpayers. It's causing American consumers to pay inflated prices. Folks are struggling at the gas pump and paying higher grocery prices. This is a war that's costing a tremendous amount of both blood and treasure, and we have a president who seems to be clueless as to how to actually bring this to a conclusion.
I would argue that it's not only the fact that there's no strategic aim that is the failure of leadership, it's also what Trump is now threatening to do. He is threatening potential war crimes. Again, he did so this morning. So what happens if he actually goes through with that threat? What consequences does he face? I think we may have lost the senator while we are sorting that out. Oh, he's back. He's back. So, Senator, I don't know if you heard my question, but Donald Trump, the president, threatened what sounds like potential war crimes again this morning. What happens if he actually goes through with that threat? Nope. Apologies for the technical difficulties. We're sorting it out. But the reason we're going to go to break. We will be back with you on the other side. We are back with Senator Gary Peters. Apologies for the technical difficulties there. Live TV, always an adventure. Senator, thank you for sticking with us. So what I was asking before the break was, with Donald Trump threatening potential war crimes again this morning, what consequences would he face if he actually goes through with that threat?
Well, certainly the condemnation of the whole world community. This simply is unacceptable. We'll see exactly what actually happens. You know, Donald Trump says a lot of things. Doesn't necessarily mean it actually happens. I would certainly hope that our military leaders who understand the rule of war and how it's important to abide by those rules will push back and not allow those kinds of operations. Those would basically be illegal orders if he's asking folks to commit crimes. But we just have to make sure that the president understands that this type of behavior is unacceptable. The United States, we have the best military in the world. We can target military targets in a way to cause the kinds of, really the kind of actions necessary to bring Iran to the bargaining table to negotiate, to try to end this war. The president has to be able to do that, but we don't see a strategy. And when you look at what's happened so far, he says his number one goal was to deal with the nuclear arsenal. We heard it on an earlier clip that you have. That nuclear material is still there. Nothing has changed from before the war. He said that we've basically destroyed the missiles and they aren't going to be able to have those attacks. Unfortunately, we have soldiers that were recently killed by missiles that seem to be more lethal and actually more maneuverable. So they are developing new weapons as well. And as you mentioned, the Strait of Hormuz, which was open and oil was flowing to the world and in the United States, has been closed because it wasn't adequately dealt with at the beginning of this war. So this has been certainly a failure on the part of leadership. This is both Hegseth and President Trump have failed. And we have to make sure that in this failure, they are not flailing and engaged in actions that really bring disrespect to the United States and our forces who always fight with honor and under the rule of law.
Well, with all due respect, I'm not sure that the threat of disapproval from the rest of the world or disrespect from the rest of the world is going to be a whole lot in the way of deterring Donald Trump from, again, executing war crimes as he has threatened to do. So my question, once again, is what actual consequences might this president face if he crosses that line of deliberately taking out civilian infrastructure in violation of the Geneva Conventions? Are there any tools that lawmakers have to hold him accountable or international bodies have to hold him accountable beyond, wagging their finger and saying this is unacceptable?
Well, certainly there's some actions. The international courts can do it as well. The international community, as we've seen, of states that have violated humanitarian laws that you could possibly bring into play. Certainly the Congress should take action against the president as well. We'd have to get my Republican colleagues to actually do that. Unfortunately, as you know, My Republican colleagues have never been willing to step up and hold the president accountable. They never ask anything when he asks something of them other than how high that they should jump. So the Congress can't act, but we do need to have Republicans stand with us. That has not happened in the past. I'll be honest with you, I don't know if that would happen in the future. So ultimately, we have to have a majority in the Congress to be able to step up and take congressional action. And that means elections. And they're coming up really soon. And we know the American people have to understand that it's time for us to take action and basically rein in a president who has been lawless in so many ways, not just during this war in Iran, but lawless on the streets of America as well.
Senator Gary Peters, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
We turn now to the House, where today Republicans narrowly approved a $95 billion budget framework for yet another reconciliation package. Reconciliation, as you may know, is this special fast-track process. It makes it easier to jam through a bill with no votes from the minority party. It's traditionally used for just one major budget bill a year. But this is actually Republicans' third time using it this Congress. The bill includes $73 billion in funding for Donald Trump's war in Iran, $12 billion for farmers hurt by Trump's own tariffs, and again, that war, and $10 billion to implement parts of Trump's voter ID bill. It passed 216 to 214. But not before Republican leadership once again had to manage a revolt of sorts from conservative members demanding deficit reduction. And that's become kind of the pattern here. The deficit cuts, the fiscal responsibility, GOP leaders promise those will come in the next bill, the next reconciliation package. Now, Republicans have moved forward again with the promise that the real cuts will finally come in Reconciliation 4.0, wink, wink. Today's vote comes after Donald Trump posted on Monday, quote, "I am asking all House Republicans to vote yes this week on the budget resolution, which is an important first step towards getting a budget bill. House Republicans must unify and fight for the Save America Act." So if you were trying to win the midterms, at least if you were trying to win the midterms, honestly, you'd probably try to deliver things like a strong economy, lower costs, stability. Yet Donald Trump is doing the opposite. Today, Trump's trade negotiator told the Senate Finance Committee that the Trump administration will continue Trump's tariffs even after the Supreme Court ruled that Trump's previous tariffs were both illegal and unconstitutional. On Monday, Donald Trump threatened Canada with new 50% tariffs, creating more uncertainty for businesses and consumers. Gas prices have climbed back above $4 a gallon nationally, reaching $4.06 a gallon today, according to AAA. The average price of gas before Trump's war, just as a reminder, was less than $3 a gallon. To compensate, Donald Trump is pressuring the Federal Reserve for lower interest rates. But markets are sending a very different signal. Rising oil prices, which are driven, again, by Trump's war, have pushed the 10-year Treasury yield up to 4.65%, which is its highest level in 2 months. Why does all of this matter to you? Higher Treasury yields mean higher mortgage rates, more expensive car loans, more expensive credit card rates. Basically, anytime you need to borrow money, it is going to cost you more to get it. In seemingly every aspect of America's economy, Donald Trump, who ran on affordability, is making everyday life more expensive. And the question for Republicans is whether Trump's agenda is helping them make their case. According to a brand new Fox poll, 54% of registered voters believe Democrats can better handle the economy, while 45% believe Republicans can. 54% of voters also expect the economy to get worse in the coming year. And that number increases to 64% when you look just at independent voters. 74% of voters say inflation has caused a financial hardship this year, with 34% saying it's caused a serious hardship. Donald Trump's own disapproval rating in that poll stands at 61%. And no wonder, here was Donald Trump's message to voters in Georgia today.
They used the word, first time I heard it, it was a word, made up by the Democrats. Affordability. They said, affordability. I said, I've been here one day. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. And we're taking care of it.
Joining us now to discuss this and more is Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. He is the top Democrat on the House Budget Committee and a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. Congressman, House Republicans got this budget framework through, but only after conservatives have been promised more spending cuts, fiscal probity, that will come in the next reconciliation package. We've heard a version of this before. At what point does that strategy lose credibility?
Well, the first thing we know, Catherine, is that Republicans have absolutely no credibility whatsoever when it comes to the question of fiscal responsibility. Republicans love to wax poetic about the importance of reducing the deficit and the national debt whenever there's a Democrat in the White House. But then, of course, when there's a Republican in the White House, Republicans fall all over themselves to add trillions and trillions more to our national debt. Their bill last year, Reconciliation 1.0, was the single biggest increase in our national debt in American history. And now they're doubling down on that in this bill, their latest reconciliation, which adds $95 billion to the national debt, none of which is paid for whatsoever. I was leading the debate on the Democratic side today, making to the point that similar that you were just making. By far, the biggest issue on voters' minds is affordability or the lack thereof. This bill does not say literally one word about affordability.
Yeah, there are, just to be fair, some unspecified government-wide savings that are supposed to help pay down the deficit, but that's a different kind of magic asterisk we can talk about another time. Also on the budget dysfunction front, after a conservative revolt and reports that the head of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, personally intervened behind closed doors, Republicans are already talking about Reconciliation 4.0. What does that tell you about where the Republican conference is right now?
Well, it is actually kind of humorous. There is this group of kind of diehard Freedom Caucus members who really do want to push for what are called pay-fors, essentially spending cuts. And Mike Johnson keeps pushing them off by saying, oh, the next reconciliation, that's when you're going to get what you want. Absolutely, the next reconciliation. They told them that as 1.0 was going on, that it would be in the next reconciliation bill. They told them it was going to be the next reconciliation bill last time when we were going through 2.0. Now they're telling them again just to get their votes to vote yes. Right now, the Reconciliation 3.0 that narrowly passed the House today faces a very uncertain future in the Senate. Frankly, I would be shocked if there really is a Reconciliation 4.0.
Between the war, high gas prices, more rounds of tariffs, it doesn't seem like Donald Trump is super laser focused on affordability, to put it mildly. I can't tell, is he indifferent to whether his party retains its incumbency in the House and the Senate come the midterm elections? Does he not realize these things that he's doing are unpopular? Does he have another plan for keeping his party in power? What is your read of why he keeps on putting in place these really, really unpopular policies that are not only failing to deliver on his promises of lower prices, but are actually undermining all of that by driving prices higher?
Well, first, let's just take him at his exact words. He has said recently, I don't think about Americans' financial situation at all. He then later on said, I love the inflation. So his messaging for Republicans for this midterm election, frankly, is exactly what you would want it to be if you're the head of the DNC or the head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He is saying the quiet part out loud. But then you go beyond just what he's saying. You actually look at the legislative actions he's taking or has taken. As you know, his tariffs are taxes on imported consumer goods that have raised costs. His Iran war has put the costs of shipping and gasoline and food through the roof. So in its totality, when you take his policies combined with what he says, it is crystal clear he just couldn't care less about the financial situation of the American people.
Well, couldn't care less, has a different strategy for retaining power. Who knows? Congressman Brendan Boyle, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, the Republican chair of the House Judiciary Committee is accusing former special prosecutor Jack Smith of lying to Congress. We'll tell you what Democrats think of this new criminal referral. That's up next. We have more now on that breaking news that my colleague Jen Psaki broke last hour. House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan has issued a criminal referral of former special prosecutor Jack Smith, accusing Smith of lying to Congress. In the referral letter obtained by MS Now, Jordan claims that Jack Smith misled Congress about how, quote, during the special counsel investigation, investigators unconstitutionally subpoenaed phone records for over a dozen Republican members of Congress and obtained gag orders to prevent the members from knowing that in May 2022, investigators in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia began seeking subpoenas for members' phone records because these members spoke with certain executive branch officials. Of course, those records of communications between Republican members of Congress and the Trump White House were part of the federal investigation into the violent attack on the Capitol and Donald Trump's attempt to overthrow the results of the 2020 election. Tonight, a representative for Jack Smith responded. The House Judiciary Committee's referral to the Department of Justice of our client, Jack Smith, is based on a spurious claim that Mr. Smith provided false testimony during his 8-hour deposition before the House Judiciary Committee. The referral is made not because Mr. Smith made a false statement, which the letter concedes, but because he did not proactively disclose information that was not responsive to a question asked. During his testimony, Mr. Smith provided truthful, responsive answers and candidly discussed his work as special counsel. This referral reflects a chilling eagerness to weaponize the justice system by attacking a career, nonpartisan public servant who faithfully and fearlessly performed his duties by following the facts and the law. Jim Jordan's Democratic counterpart on the committee, Congressman Jamie Raskin, was a little less measured in his response tonight, saying, quote, this referral, if ever brought before a judge, will get laughed out of court. But success on the merits is not the goal. It is meant to harass Jack Smith. It is meant to please their Fox News viewership. It is meant to whitewash their own participation in a scheme to overthrow our elections. And above all, it is meant to create a distraction so Republicans on Senate Judiciary can feel just a little more comfortable confirming the architect of the Epstein cover-up and lawless Trump slush fund and super pardon, Todd Blanche, to the post of Attorney General. We will not fall for this ludicrous distraction, neither will the American people, unquote. Joining us now to discuss is Congressman James Walkinshaw, Democrat of Virginia. He is a member of the House Oversight Committee. So, Congressman, your colleague Jamie Raskin says that this referral would be, quote, laughed out of court. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Look, Jack Smith was asked if he obtained text messages via toll records, and the answer was no. What Jim Jordan didn't know and should have known is that a lot of those text messages exist in the National Archive as part of the presidential record, and Jack Smith was able to get access to some of them that way. Jim Jordan didn't ask that question. Shoddy work by him in the deposition. But this referral is a joke. And just like many of the other politicized prosecutions that Todd Blanche has taken into courtrooms, it's going to get thrown out.
If Democrats win control of the House, do you think that your committee should investigate Congressman Jordan's actions here as an abuse of power?
Well, look, Jim Jordan and other congressional Republicans were part of Donald Trump's scheme to overturn the results of a free and fair election in 2020. Jim Jordan is also one of those Republicans who defied a congressional subpoena to answer questions about his role in January 6th and his role in an effort to overturn the election. So there needs to be accountability for all of that. Folks involved in that need to answer questions about their role and their efforts to overturn a free and fair election.
Well, so to clarify, does that mean that you think that if Democrats retake the House, it is appropriate to launch an investigation of your colleague Jim Jordan for potentially abusing his power? What is accountability?
I think we're going to, yeah, look, I think we will have to investigate the weaponization of the Justice Department under this Trump administration. And to the extent that members of Congress are aiding and abetting that weaponization, the effort to harass a career public servant like Jack Smith, efforts to harass other nonpartisan, non-political public servants who did their job to try to find justice around January 6th and other illegal actions by Donald Trump and his administration. All of that will need to be investigated.
You talk about the retribution here from potentially the DOJ and or your colleagues on the other side of the aisle in Congress. Do you think it will give pause to future civil servants considering taking up important but divisive independent roles like this, or other important roles in law enforcement? I'm thinking about the efforts to persecute/prosecute people like James Comey. What do you think the net effect is on incentives to serve your country, given that this kind of fate may be awaiting you?
It's such an important question. You know, I represent 50,000 dedicated federal employees in my district in Virginia, folks who put the Constitution and their service to the American people ahead of loyalty to any politician, whether it's Donald Trump or anyone else. They take their patriotism very, very seriously. Clearly, there's an effort to intimidate folks like that. They've been fired, they've been pushed out, they've been harassed, they've been referred for prosecution. But I have deep and abiding faith in the patriotism of the American people and the dedicated public servants who serve across the government in non-political roles. And I'm confident that despite this effort to intimidate them, they're going to continue to do their jobs now and into the future.
Congressman James Walkinshaw, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, election denialism is back on the ballot in Arizona after last night's primary elections. But will that end up backfiring on Republicans come November? That's next. Last night's Arizona election results should be setting off alarm bells, very loud alarm bells, not just in Arizona, but really nationwide. Republican voters chose nominees in powerful statewide offices who have questioned, challenged, or outright refused to accept the results of the 2020 presidential election. Trump was stopped in 2020, as you may recall, by Republican officials in Arizona who refused to put Trump ahead of the voters. But last night, vocal election denier, Republican Congressman Andy Biggs, won his party's nomination for governor. His general election rival, incumbent Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs, joined us last night and had this to say.
My very likely opponent after tonight is going to be Andy Biggs, who, as you've already described, is an election denier, who not only is an ally of Trump and refuses to acknowledge the results of the 2020 election, but he went so far as to help plan January 6th. He also helped orchestrate the fake elector scheme that went on here in Arizona. Arizona is one of 7 swing states that will decide the presidential election. And as you described, in 2020, we had a free and fair election because, as Secretary of State, I defended the will of the voters. If Andy Biggs is governor, Arizona is the first swing state with an election denier in charge.
And to be clear, Andy Biggs isn't the only Republican nominee in Arizona with a record of challenging the 2020 election. State Representative Alexander Kolodin is now the Republican nominee for Secretary of State in Arizona. Kolodin was involved in Trump's legal efforts challenging Arizona's 2020 election results. And Republican Warren Peterson, who also backed Trump's effort to challenge the 2020 election, is now the Republican nominee for Attorney General in Arizona. Here's how Donald Trump responded to last night's results in Arizona earlier today.
You saw we had a big victory last night in Arizona. I've had victories everywhere. But we're not going to be able to take it much longer when they can't get past voter ID, proof of citizenship, no mail-in ballots because they're crooked as hell.
Joining us now to discuss is Bram Resnick, politics reporter with 12 News in Phoenix. So thanks so much for joining me. Several of these Republican nominees have questioned or challenged the results of the 2020 election. My question to you is, how much do Arizona voters still actually care about that issue, and how present was that issue in the campaigns to date?
It was not present in the campaigns. And I have to say, as we're sitting here watching all this, I had a flashback to 2020. You probably remember November 2020, when Governor Ducey was certifying the election. He got a phone call. The ringtone was "Hail to the Chief." It was Donald Trump calling him, trying to apparently stop the certification. And here we are again, and it has not been part of the conversation, but as we saw just last week, Donald Trump, and just in that video you showed, Donald Trump could make it part of the conversation again. And Andy Biggs has not really answered many of the questions regarding his involvement in what happened in 2020. He certainly does not want to talk about that as he emerges from the primaries, trying to paint himself as bipartisan, as a protector of children. It is clearly not a conversation any of these candidates want to have. And I'll add, pollsters say it appears voters have moved on. They want to talk about affordability, inflation, that kind of thing, and not necessarily what happened in 2020.
Donald Trump, as you point out, endorsed Andy Biggs and celebrated these primary victories as MAGA wins. How much of Arizona's general election will be a referendum on Trump, in your view?
I think we're no different. Arizona's no different from any other state. It'll be a referendum on Trump in the sense of people look at their gas prices, food prices, affordability issues, the war. It can't help but be a referendum on Donald Trump and every Republican candidate. House, Senate, we don't have any Senate races this year for the first time in 12 years, but our House candidates and statewide candidates are going to have to deal with that.
Arizona's Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs is running for a second term after winning a very, very close race in 2022. What's your view on how strong she is as an incumbent? Has her record given voters a reason to stick with her despite Trump's rhetoric and attacks?
Well, over the last 4 years, we've had divided government for the first time in a decade. It's a new experience for many people. It's resulted in Hobbs issuing 500 vetoes. There are some people who like that. A lot of people don't like that. It is her telling the Republican legislature, sorry, that's not going to happen. So people are of two minds about that. She doesn't necessarily present a strong image to the public. She is more of a person kind of standing in the way of something that, in her mind, and that many others, could be worse. So it's a tough position to be in, just being the bulwark against a Republican majority in the legislature. This issue does play to her strength, how she stood up for the elections in 2020 and thereafter. That really gave her a voice. And I think, as you heard in that soundbite, she really does rise to the occasion when the topic is free and fair elections.
Bram Resnick, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, Democrats are hoping to flip the House seat of a Florida Republican who has been embroiled in scandal and under investigation by the House Ethics Committee. The Democratic candidate looking to unseat Florida Republican Congressman Corey Mills will join us after the break. As we approach the midterm elections, we are also keeping an eye on House races that could determine which party controls Congress. One of those races is Florida's 7th congressional district, where veteran and Democratic candidate Bale Dalton is looking to unseat two-term Republican Congressman Corey Mills. Congressman Mills is apparently the subject of a Department of Justice criminal investigation, according to two sources familiar with the matter who have spoken with MS Now. The sources didn't disclose the focus of the DOJ investigation, but the DOJ investigation comes as Mills also stares down an ongoing investigation from the House Ethics Committee. Congressman Mills has denied any wrongdoing, and 104 days out from the midterm election, it appears a blue wave could be building. A new Fox poll released tonight shows that 53% of voters say they will vote for Democrats, while 46% will vote for Republicans. Tonight's new Fox poll shows Democrats have a 9-point advantage over Republicans on the economy. a 10-point advantage over Republicans on prices and inflation, and a 21-point advantage over Republicans on health care. Joining us now is Bale Dalton, Democratic candidate for Florida's 7th Congressional District. He is a Navy veteran and former NASA Chief of Staff. Bale, Donald Trump carried your district in 2024. Cook Political Report calls Florida's 7th, and R+5 still rates the race that you're running in as likely Republican. What makes you confident that you can flip this red seat to blue? What's your path to victory?
Well, hi, Catherine. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I think much of the program tonight has focused on the very issues. I mean, the bottom line here in Central Florida, District 7, Seminole and Volusia County, is that life is too expensive, life has been made too difficult, and Congressman Mills is too corrupt to fix it. I was born and raised here in Central Florida, spent a lifetime in public service, 24 years in the Navy fighting terrorists in Iraq, Afghanistan, and throughout the Horn of Africa, helped lead NASA as Chief of Staff. And I think folks are looking for better and more responsible representation. And I've been in a lot of leadership roles before, and really building a coalition here in Central Florida of Republicans, independents, and disaffected Republicans who are tired of being represented like someone like Corey Mills. Of course, we are waiting on more details from that DOJ investigation that broke this week. But what we do know is that Corey Mills has already been slapped with a restraining order by a Florida judge for revenge porn and blackmail of a Florida woman. We do know that the cops were called to his house in D.C. On a domestic violence abuse, and he apparently escaped arrest through D.C. cronyism. And we do know that folks who even served with Congressman Mills in the Army have raised questions about the stories he tells people about his service there. So, folks here in Florida are just fed up with, Congressman Mills and how he has continued to lie to them.
So to be clear, Congressman Mills has denied wrongdoing in all of those cases. But one thing I do want to ask you about is this debate that's been going on around the country about whether character still matters for politicians in the current political landscape, given all of the questions that you raised about the person who is likely to be your opponent, Corey Mills. Do you think character still matters in your race and in other races around the country in which Democrats are weighing questions like that?
I do think character still matters. And I think it's been too long that we have just accepted the status quo in Washington, D.C. And now that we see, this corruption and grift rise to exponential heights, people here in Florida are just completely fed up. And, we've seen that already. I mean, the only public poll in this race so far shows me leading Corey Mills by 2%. And that's by virtue of building, again, this coalition of folks of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And, when I'm on the phone with people here in the district or knocking doors, they are concerned that somebody is, actually looking out for them and ready to roll up their sleeves and actually address these issues of rising costs, rising utilities, and insurance that's just out of reach for our Florida families.
Florida congressional candidate Bale Dalton, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope your viewers will come support us and get one of the more corrupt candidates, more corrupt congressmen out of Congress by visiting us at BaleDalton.com. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Bale. That is tonight's last word.